Welcome to this screencast on Rolling with Ruby on Rails, pimped up to version Rails 2.0. The same example found on unlam.com. I have upgraded it to Rails 2.0 and it's totally revamped to use the sexiest, latest Rails version, and you'll see the latest features available in Rails 2.0. So let's get started. So Rails by default uses MySQLite as the default database. I want to use MySQL, so I'll just use minus minus d equals MySQL to say, hey, I don't want to use SQLite, I want to use MySQL. And let's go to the Rails root directory, and there is a new rake command that you can use, rake db create all. This will go ahead and create the cookbook underscore development, cookbook underscore test, and cookbook underscore production database for you. And let's go ahead and generate the scaffold. This scaffold is much better. This is not a dynamic scaffold found in old version of Rails, and it's really good to start with, and you can modify it accordingly later on when you need it, and it's a very good starting point. It's nothing it's clean code basically. This scaffold is much better in Rails 2.0. Generates much cleaner code that you can modify it according to your needs. Okay, let's create a scaffold for recipe, and this will create the views, the controller, the model, the migration file, since I have specified the attribute and its type. And we will do the same thing for the category also. Category is just going to have one attribute, which is just name. It's of type string, and that's it. Okay, now we'll go ahead and customize the migration scripts to specify the relationship between categories and recipes, also to specify the limits of this title. Let's say title should be limited to 100, and that's it. And description is also limited to 255. Instructions is test, and it automatically created timestamps, but we need to specify one more thing here, that is the foreign key, t.references category. So references is something new in this Rails 2.0. If you want to refer to a foreign key, previously you had to do t.category underscore id, which is of type integer, and you had to specify that way. Now we just say this table references category. So in recipe model you will have a belongs to category. This is the foreign key, category underscore id. And let's open the second migration file and specify the limit here also. Limit is going to be 100. And that's it. We are done with the migration. Now we can create these tables by doing a rake db migrate. This will generate the categories and the recipes table. Okay, it's done. Now let's open up the models and set up the active record associations between category and recipe. So category has many recipes, and you have recipe which is going to have belongs to category. And in the public, we'll just delete the index.html and define a default home page for us using the latest map.root that's available. See, map.root controller you can specify. So I'll just uncomment this one. I want to go to categories controller, for instance. Okay. As you can see, the scaffolders already create the map.resources, categories, and recipes. So this will map to categories index action. We're done with the routes. We have set up the active record association. Now the generated files for app views in categories, the new, let's say recipes, let's go to new, and the edit is the same thing which is having right here. So as you can see, the instructions was declared as text in the migration file, so it knows it needs to render text area when I generate the scaffold. So I'm going to create a partial so that I can reuse this partial across edit and new. So I'll create a form.html.erb. As you can see, the extension is now html.erb and it's not rhtml. Here it is, and instead of create, I'll just use a local variable button. Okay, so in the new, for recipes, I'll render a partial. This is a form partial, and I need to pass in local variables such as this f, as well as the value for the button text. I want the button text to be, for new it should be create. Okay, and for edit, it's very similar. So edit, I want this thing to be update. Okay, so as you can see, the link to is very simplified these days. You don't have to muck around with controller, action keys, or anything. You just say recipe and the link to knows, oh, I need to show this recipe. We'll see that later. So I have a form partial with all these fields here. I want to do one more thing, which is to display the categories as a combo box. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to display categories as a form partial. I'm going to use the form helper, Rails form helper. This is something you need to write. The scaffold won't be able to do it for you. So you have category, select drop down box, recipe is the name of the object, category ID is the one that's going to be submitted to the backend, and find all the category, loop through them, and I give name ID to generate the drop down boxes. So the drop down box will have human readable name, and the value submitted to the database will be these IDs that's stored. And the category ID will be stored into the params hash, and whatever was selected will be submitted in this on that params hash. Okay, let's now go ahead and see if this is going to work. Let's open up this console. Before I do that, I need to just change one more thing in the environment.rb. You don't really have to do this, but since I already had another cookbook session, I'm going to change this, otherwise I'll get a exception when I try to run it. Cookie would be tampered, so I'm using another session key, but you don't have to do this. So before I start the server, I change the environment, and now I can start the server on port 3001. And let's go to the home page. Tampered with cookie. Okay, let's change it back. Maybe change it to something else. Environment. Let's call it my cookbook session, since I already have used both cookbook and cookbook 1 or 2. So let's restart the server. Now it will have a new cookie. I don't think it will conflict with the previous ones I had created before. Okay, it's running. Let's refresh. There it is. Now we have listing categories. Now we can create new category. Let's say sweet, and you can edit, make it sour, and you can update, and you can go to the main page. It will list all the categories. Let's go ahead and create a few categories, and one more for a good measure. Spicy. So I have all the categories now, and I can also go to recipes, and I create a new recipe. Now we can see all these options now being populated. Mamma Mia's pizza, yum yum yummy. Description and instructions. Instructions go here, and then you can just do a create. Go back, and another recipe. Let's create something. And I'll just create this. Let's go back. So I'm able to create all these things. Now let's go to the recipes index. Recipes index. In the recipes index, I'm going to list the table in recipe, category, and date, and then have a link to recipe title, and then delete link, and then the category, and then the date. So I'm going to take this thing out. Basically, I'll have a recipe title, and you can click on it, and it'll display that recipe. See, You don't even have to say recipe URL and then pass in the recipe. Just knows, link to knows. That needs to be shown. And then delete. Here is, I want to delete this resource. I want to show this resource. I want to delete this. How do I mention it's going to be a delete? By having this method parameter, which is a verb that's going to indicate, okay, I want to delete that resource. And then here I have, I'll come to this later. I'll show you what this thing is going to do later on. So for now, let's go back to the browser and refresh this. Okay, now I have recipe, which I can display. And now I can also delete them. Let's delete this. It says, okay, so it's gone. I can create new recipes. Let me create some more of the same category. You'll see the functionality of just showing only those with the same category. So we have 2 sour and 1 spicy stuff. So we'll add some logic to the controller so that when you click on sour, it will only display the sour thing. Right now it doesn't do it. So let's go ahead to the recipes index action. Recipes controller. Here in the index, we are going to have a logic here. So we will basically check what category ID was submitted. And if the category ID was not it was nil, we'll find everything by default. Otherwise, we'll only find those records for that particular category. And we'll reset that hash to nil so it doesn't linger on across requests. So with that in place, when I click on this, it will display one is only sour. And if we say just recipes, it'll display everything. And if I want to see one of this, it displays that alone. Okay, now we have that working. Let's move on to a few more things like application.rstml. The scaffold created default RS, layout files. So we'll go to app layouts. We delete them both. We don't need it. Adios. Move trash, and then we'll create a application.html file. Okay, and in this file we're going to have our application wide layout. Okay, so this is the application wide layout. This is online cookbook, style set link tag. It's nothing new. I'm going to use application.css. If there is a CSS, that's what it's going to use. So online cookbook is the heading. Flash notice if there are any error messages. This yield is the one other views output will get rendered at this location, and all these things will be common to all the pages. So if params controller is recipe, I'm creating a new recipe. So this is a new recipe URL. How do you know I want to create a new recipe? You can do a rec routes. Rec routes will show you using this you can find out what the method name should be. If you want to, let's say, I want to, in this case, I want to create a new recipe. So recipes, I want to route to new action. So recipes new. So this is new recipe uh, underscore URL. That will be the URL helper. So new recipe URL, a new category URL. And they don't need ID because it's new and it does not have an ID yet. So you don't have to pass the recipe here or the category here. And show all recipes, basically I want to go to recipes index actions. So recipes index is mapped to here. So recipes URL. So you can just give recipes URL here. Okay. So those are the things that you can just use. It's good to know rec routes and then use where you need it when you need it. Okay. So let's go back to the browser and list all the categories. Now we are using the application wide layout file, as you can see, and it's in a table. And also have create new category, show all recipes, show all categories. So when I click this, you see all the categories, and you can create a new category here. Can't resist food. Okay, show all recipes. Now we have all the recipes, show all categories, including the one I created. I can destroy them. That works. Can create a new category, and I can show all categories, recipes. This thing you can format it according to what your requirements. You can use some date helpers, date time extension in Rails, I believe. Okay, let's now, what else is left? So we have seen everything in action. There is a problem though. I'll show you what the problem is. So if you see all these categories, there are 3 categories right now. If you just try a category here that this recipe uses, this is going to blow up. So we have to modify the categories destroy method, categories controller, and in the destroy we need to check. We won't delete if somebody else is using that some recipes is using that category. So we'll check, and if there are no recipes that are using the category, then we'll go ahead and just delete the category. So here in the destroy, we'll find all the recipes for that particular category ID. And if there are any recipes which is using that category, then we won't delete it. Only if we did not find any recipes using them, we'll just go ahead and destroy it. So we can go back here and we can show all categories and we do a destroy. It won't destroy because it's being used by one of the recipes here. But what we could do, you can delete this guy here. Sweet. That'll puff, go away. Okay, so if we did not have the code, this checking code here, I'll show you what the problem is. If you go ahead and destroy this, you'll go ahead and delete it. But when you go to this show all recipes, you'll get a nice stack trace. Lovely. Okay, so we have seen a lot of new features in Rails 2.0, and we have seen how to write the onlamp.com rolling with Ruby on Rails. So thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this screencast, please recommend me on working with Rails. See you next time.